lecture that we do here on the channel every Sunday, and this time I'm bringing you a topic you voted on a couple weeks ago. I hope everybody is continuing to enjoy their holidays, but we're going to take a break from the holiday backgrounds and the holiday theme, and we're going to be looking at the life of President James Monroe, the fifth American president, many consider to be the final founding father to be president of the United States, although Monroe wasn't quite the founding father on the levels of Jefferson, Madison, Washington, and Adams. He was an extremely important part of the rise of the Democratic Republicans, of kind of a classical liberal view of political government, of the Virginia dynasty, and remains an extremely impactful president on in terms of his connections to Jefferson and Madison in particular, the Virginia dynasty, and the founding. And of course, during his presidency was also an extremely effective administrator and is one of the more underrated presidents, I would say, in American history. Typically seen as a C or B tier president, he probably deserves at least an A minus. And if you want to learn more about my rankings of U.S. presidents, you can watch my tier ranking video on the U.S. presidents, which includes James Monroe. I also have an entire series of shorts on the U.S. presidents where I cover all of them in a video about one good or bad thing about each president that I did as a special for President's Day. So please go check those out. We have long-form videos dropping twice a week and short-form content every day here on the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, along with our Q&A, which is Fridays and Saturdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. A very happy Sunday to you and a wonderful holiday season I hope is continuing for all of you, and I hope you really enjoy the lecture about the fifth American president. And this extremely famous painting of George Washington is quite significant to the story, so there'll be more to say about that as we go along. So anyways, where were we? Please like and subscribe and become a Friendly Neighborhood Historian. It's as easy as all of that. The chat is working, so anyways, we'll get started just in a second when I have the photos selected for the background. Okay, my president series I did back in July of 24, so I have to scroll way back to find the photos I have saved here of James Monroe. There he is. We'll use a few different pictures of, again, one of the more interesting American presidents and one of the most important in U.S. history. By the way, James Monroe is the third president who died on July 4th. He died July 4th, 1831, the same day, 5 years afterwards, albeit after Jefferson and Adams both died on the 50th anniversary of when they signed the Declaration of Independence. So, anyways. I wish a very happy Sunday to you, and welcome to our live stream lecture about the fifth president in American history, James Monroe. So, let's see. Usually we have a chat. I don't know what's going on, why people can't. Okay, hopefully you can all hear me and can see the screen clearly and our background of James Monroe, the fifth president of the United States. So James Monroe was born in 1758 in Virginia. This makes him the youngest of the first five presidents. He's 15 years younger than Thomas Jefferson, his political mentor. He's 7 years younger than his political associate James Madison, who was president right before him, for whom he was Secretary of State. So Monroe has a different connection to the Revolutionary War effort than the other founding fathers and the other members of what's called the Virginia dynasty. The Virginia dynasty is the third, fourth, and fifth president: Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. And while George Washington was from Virginia, he's not considered part of it because he didn't share the exact same political philosophy as the three other men. The Virginia dynasty was basically the backbone of what became known as the Democratic Republican Party, which was a political party that formed in the early American Republic that was basically opposed to federalism and to an oversaturation of centralized government authority over the economy, over social life, over political life, and they were extremely active and extremely powerful during the early part of the 19th century. They would eventually divide, and the Democratic Party would kind of get its start from there. But basically, thanks to they are kind of built by Jefferson and Madison's anti-government, pro-liberty stance, where they believe that the rights of the people come before the centralized authority of the government, and they have a vision of the yeoman farmers of Virginia and the other places of the country being the most important parts of American society. So again, Monroe is heavily influenced by Madison and Jefferson. And he's a lot younger than them, and while they are forming their identities as politicians and political thinkers at this extremely critical moment in American history, he is going to be forming his standard on the battlefield. That's what's going to make him stand out early in his political life or early in his career as a fighter in the American Revolution. Monroe is one of, again, the last presidents to fight in the American Revolution. And he is connected very much so to the famous crossing of the Delaware. Now, the famous painting of the crossing of the Delaware obviously didn't take place when George Washington crossed the Delaware with his soldiers. But Monroe was fighting for Washington at that time, and had recently been injured at the Battle, I think, of Long Island, and almost died in that battle. But he was only, I think, 17 when the war started, and so he joins the war effort at a young age. And let me see, what else does he do? He's fighting in Washington's division. He's injured at the Battle of Long Island during the New York campaign, where Washington's forces are heavily defeated. And on Christmas Day, 1775 or 1776, Washington is forced to cross the Delaware, escaping the attacks from the British, basically giving up on New York and fleeing into New Jersey, where he's able to win several important victories like Trenton and Newark. Monroe is fighting with Washington at this time, and well, we don't know that he directly crosses the Delaware with Washington in the same boat or at the exact same moment. That is forever depicted and becomes one of the most famous paintings in American history. So a lot of people know about Washington crossing the Delaware, and I had that painting a second ago. I'm going to find it for the background to explain it. A lot of people know about that painting and how incredible it is, and it's obviously an idealized painting of Washington fleeing across the Delaware so that he doesn't get destroyed by the British troops. It also comes with it also comes with another American president on it, and that was the way it was painted. I think it wasn't painted until much later, but James Monroe is the man holding the American flag behind Washington, looking defiantly towards the waters and across the sea. So of course this very famous painting that has Washington standing so statuesque and bravely, which probably wasn't how it worked at all. The river was probably frozen and very hard to traverse, or freezing at that point. But it does have two American presidents, not just George Washington, but the one I'm discussing here on the Friendly Neighborhood History for our live stream lecture today, James Monroe. So Monroe fights with distinction during the war. He's injured. He almost dies of his wounds. His injury might have come after this event, but at the war's end, he leaves the army. He is interested in law and in Virginia politics. The Virginia Assembly has been the stepping stone to the rise of many great Virginia politicians who generally tend to have this high view of individual rights. People like Patrick Henry, George Mason, and of course Jefferson and Madison. Monroe himself will serve in the Virginia legislature called the House of Burgesses, which is the oldest legislative body in American history, or in U.S. history, if you want to use that terminology. Which started early on with the settlement of Jamestown. Soon afterwards, in the early 17th century, there was already a House of Burgesses. The House of Burgesses predates the first Thanksgiving, the arrival of the Pilgrims, the arrival of the first slaves, and the birth of any of the founding fathers, and of course is completely in the 17th century. So this self-governing body in Virginia had been a critical political body in the United States, and Virginia had been one of the leaders in the American Revolutionary Movement. So Monroe has field experience as a fighter and leader and officer and wounded warrior of the American Revolution. And he's got good connections with Monroe and Madison. He went to I believe he also attended the College of William and Mary, which they did. This puts him in the same par. That is, as far as Virginia is considered, that is the Harvard of Virginia, especially at that time. So the University of Virginia doesn't exist yet. It's actually going to be founded by Jefferson and Madison during Monroe's presidency. In which he kept good contact with his mentors and political allies and friends. And this is the building blocks of the Virginia dynasty. And I have done live stream lectures on both Jefferson and Madison and their legacies as some of the most important presidents and political leaders in American history. A lot of people know about Jefferson, a good amount know about Madison, very few know about James Monroe. And that's why we're doing this lecture today. If you're enjoying it, please like and subscribe and become a Friendly Neighborhood Historian. It's as easy as that. I'm not answering questions right now, but I might be able to at the end. We'll see how the lecture goes. But a very happy holiday season and a wonderful Sunday to you all. Great to see you here at the Friendly Neighborhood History channel, where we do history in a friendly, neighborly manner. Yeah. Well, Pancho, you know that a Civil War general may have been inspired by the British game rounders invented baseball. You could watch, or partially invented baseball. You could go and watch that on this History Channel if you want to learn more about baseball. I talk about baseball all the time. Talk about sports all the time on this channel. So, anyways, but enjoy your baseball game, even though baseball's not being played now because it's the middle of winter. But regardless, so the Monroe graduates College of William and Mary. He becomes a lawyer. He becomes involved in the Virginia body politic. He doesn't have as much of a say in the formation of a country as the other founding fathers do. He is clearly influenced by the anti-federalist notions of the late 1780s that are promulgated in Virginia. Federalists were at first the people who supported not just the formation of a strong centralized government as the political party would entail, but also wanted to approve a constitution. And although Madison helped write the Federalist Papers and the Constitution itself and advocated strongly for the creation of a constitution, he also wrote the Bill of Rights, believing strongly in the need of a government to recognize individual rights of the people that were supposedly given by God. That was the view of these of his political philosophy of individual liberties and what we call now classical liberalism that Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe held deeply, and it was inspired, of course, by Lockean political philosophy from the late 17th century in Great Britain, and, of course, the Enlightenment. So Monroe is actually at odds with his friend and political mentor, James Madison, who writes the Federalist Papers and advocates for the formation of a constitutional system for the United States to replace the decentralized and weak Articles of Confederation. He's not alone. George Mason, who even attends the Constitutional Convention, is opposed to it. Patrick Henry is opposed to it. The Anti-Federalist, which will eventually morph into the Democratic Republican Party, is very much set against the creation of a constitutional system that does not guarantee individual rights. And even after those rights are guaranteed by the Bill of Rights, they're still not crazy about the idea. So Monroe is kind of in opposition, and this brings him closer to Jefferson, who isn't in the country. Something that a lot of people don't know is that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, two of the most important founding fathers, were not present at the writing of the Constitution. And Madison and Jefferson and Monroe, who was siding with Jefferson, opposed each other at certain points during this venture. So the Virginia dynasty wasn't always in lockstep agreement about every single part of this. Madison had sided with John Jay, George Washington, and Alexander Hamilton for the advocacy of the creation of a federal system. Madison also believed, very importantly, in the recognition of individual rights, which is why he wrote the Bill of Rights. Anyways, what happens next? Monroe decides to... what happens next? Monroe also got married around this time. He marries Elizabeth Knox, and they have a very strong marriage. They have a couple of daughters, and their relationship is one of the closer ones between a president and first lady, from everything that we know of back then. The Monroe goes to Congress. I believe he serves in the Senate for some time in the early American country. He's an opponent of the Federalist notions of a strong centralized government and will continue to side with Jefferson and Madison, who kind of comes back to the fold after a few years, in opposing Alexander Hamilton and John Adams and the Federalists, who run the American government for basically the first 10 years, with Washington not wanting to choose a political side and believing political parties were stupid and would only lead to chaos and division. The Federalist Papers themselves had warned about the need for the dangers of faction and the need for a good government to control faction within the American system. Monroe, again, doesn't have a lot to do with the formation of Constitution, but I believe he eventually, as a member of the Virginia legislature, votes to approve a constitution only with the Bill of Rights being present. So he's firmly inside. They call themselves Republicans. History calls them Democratic Republicans, which emphasize individual rights and liberties over a strong central government. It advocates the rights of farmers and people in smaller areas in the frontier, plantations, individual farms. What Jefferson calls the yeoman farm ideal is central to the political philosophy of the Democratic Republicans and is central to Monroe and will be a huge part of his presidency 25 years later. This is in stark opposition to New England mercantile establishments, the advocacy of a national bank, the creation of debt and investment in trade with other mercantile powers like the British. And this is the commonplace default of the Federalists, who, being New Englanders and from the northern colonies, or northern states, will tend to advocate for their rights. So, I'm not answering questions right now. This is the live stream lecture. When the lecture's over, there should be time for questions. What happens? Madison then, or sorry, Monroe's big rise is in the early 19th century. And like Jefferson and Madison before him, he will make a name for himself in the field of foreign policy. Jefferson had been the minister to France during the French Revolution and then had been Washington's Secretary of State, the first one in national history, and then in 1801 he becomes president. And he selects as his Secretary of State. Vice President isn't seen as a stepping stone to the presidency, by the way. For the first 15 years of American history, the Vice President was the runner-up in the Electoral College. And eventually they decided that this was just ridiculously absurd, so they allowed presidents to pick it was party conventions, but later on, presidents would eventually come to pick their vice presidential selections. So Madison is not vice president, but he is Secretary of State, which is a stepping stone to the presidency. He will get elected in 1808, and Monroe becomes the special envoy to France. And this is extraordinarily important because Monroe enters national politics with one of the biggest wins in foreign policy in American history under his belt. In 1803, the United States agrees, as Monroe serves as the middleman between Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, who's Secretary of State, and Napoleon, as the country that purchases the Louisiana Territory from France, who had just gotten it back from the Spanish. This doubles the size of the United States for $15 million. And it leads to the Lewis and Clark expedition and many of the great accomplishments of Jefferson's presidency. And James Monroe is the man who kind of meets in the middle and makes it happen during the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. There is actually probably a good video that could be made discussing the importance of the Secretary of State in recognizing future presidents from 1789 all the way until about 1830. It wasn't until John Adams is the only aberration during that time where a Secretary of State doesn't become the vice president, instead of the Secretary of State, accedes to the presidency, and Jefferson became president right after him anyways. So Washington's Secretary of State, Jefferson's Secretary of State, Madison's Secretary of State, and Monroe's Secretary of State will all become president in their own time. And that's a spoiler because when Madison is elected, James Monroe becomes his Secretary of State, continuing the power of the Virginia dynasty and the Democratic Republican Party, which has basically pushed the Federalist Party off a map. The American population is growing, it is expanding westward, and many of them are more interested in individual liberties, rights, and many of them are farmers. There is a strong mercantile establishment in the North, but that is a minority of the population at this time. The North has not been overly immigrated like it will be in the next few decades. So Madison is elected easily and reelected once again. Jefferson's presidency was very successful, and Monroe becomes his Secretary of State. This becomes an important role for Monroe to serve in dealing with a foreign crisis that Madison before him and Jefferson before him had to deal with. For 25 years, ever since the French Revolution, the British and the French have been at war with one another. The British looking to pick off French lands and influence during the Revolution are now being bullied by Napoleon, who continues with his Grande Armée to be the scourge of Europe until he will be beaten by the Russians in 1812 when Madison is president. The British and French had both been seizing American cargo ships and sailors for some time. The British have been particularly antagonistic about this okay, hold on a second. Steve, I don't care about the Supreme Court right now. Yes, I've done an incredible series of videos on the Supreme Court, but Roger Taney is the same guy who made the Dred Scott decision, so I don't think you should be citing him as a source. Getting back to what I was talking about. Monroe serves as Secretary of State at the beginning of the War of 1812, where basically the Americans, tired of being bullied by the British on the high seas, and the British had the greatest navy in the world at the time, decide to go to war. And so Madison gets into war. He's pressured by war hawks and new leaders in the party like Henry Clay and John C. Calhoun, who become legendary American politicians in their own right. And Monroe, managing foreign affairs, is obviously in an extremely important position as the United States has entered its first official war. So this is what happens between 1812 and 1814. Now, the British are able to take care of both of their opponents. They defeat Napoleon, and then they, with the help of the Russians, and then are also able to whip the Americans, burning their capital. And of course, this includes Monroe's offices. So when I believe by the time Monroe becomes president, the White House is rebuilt, and it'll be Elizabeth who spends a lot of her time kind of revamping this new look to the White House and hosting parties and welcoming dignitaries. She's not quite the lively party thrower that Dolly Madison is, but she is extremely consequential in the development of the second White House. You could call it the second White House or the second presidential mansion, because they didn't call it the White House back then. I'm flattered that you think I'm reading from ChatGPT, but this is all coming from in here. Monroe is elected in 1816 despite the difficulties of the war. Despite Madison being blamed for the war, Madison's presidency is seen as pretty successful for the most part, and now it is time for the Virginia dynasty to continue, and now the last member of that dynasty is coming to bear. Jefferson had his time, and then Madison, and now James Monroe has been elected President of the United States. Monroe is overwhelmingly elected in the last election that will include a Federalist. And he is extraordinarily popular. He's likable. And he basically has a very hands-off idea about running the country. He believes that the president's job is to kind of just oversee things and let them run their course. The United States didn't really get punished by the British the way they could have been, in a show of beneficence to the British, who were far more concerned with reorganizing Europe in the wake of Napoleon. That allows the United States to kind of get away scot-free from a war that they lost. What else happens? America is expanding. New states are being added to the Union. The economy is starting to grow and prosper, and people are becoming aware of the need to settle the lands of the Louisiana Purchase and to build new settlements and cities. Travel and trade increase. New inventions are coming. The Industrial Revolution is starting to slowly but surely come across the sea. Samuel Slater brings some of the inventions that he saw in Great Britain, including the factory system, to New England in the late 1810s. And so Monroe kind of watches all of this happen during his presidency, the growth of the American economy and the need for transportation, trade, and travel influence the designs of the Democratic Republicans to create what's called the American system. The American system was a series of canals, bridges, roads, highways, waterways, constructions that would a series of infrastructure projects that would basically allow the American people to travel westward, to make travel and trade more accessible. And of course, this system is extremely successful until railroads will eventually supplant it. But it is a way for the early industrial America to start moving westward. And this is also, Monroe's presidency is also the time that steamboats become common in the U.S. So there's inventions, there's discoveries, there's exploration, there's settlement, there's growth. It's pretty incredible what's happening. I don't have any notes in front of me. I don't have a script, nothing at all. What else was I going to say? You can see my eye movements. My eye movements are natural. But thank you, Justin. And Rodolfo, don't time them out. I like it when people say I'm reading from a script or this is AI, because it's not. I take it as a big compliment. Hello, Bill. Good to see you. Bill, by the way, has an emoji because he is a member. If you want to become a member and an official Friendly Neighborhood Historian, it's very cheap. You get early access and bonus content, and you will be able to join us for our members only live tomorrow, where I will be going in depth on questions with members at 7 o'clock Eastern. I'm looking forward to that. So tomorrow, or 6 p.m. Eastern. Sorry, there will be a Q&A for members only on the channel. So if you haven't become a member now. What happens next? So Monroe, the American economy is growing. America is becoming semi-industrial. There's economic development. There's new inventions that are helping. There is resuming of international trade that helps America quite a bit during this time, because you no longer have to worry about the war with the issues with British impressment and stealing of sailors and cargo. This allows more trade with Canada. And the United States is a fledgling nation, but it is transitioning. It is clearly, there is a sense of a Monroe presidency of this end of youth and innocence of the United States. It's very much a transitory period for the American government, for the American economy, and for America as a society. The age of the founders is kind of over. And Monroe is barely a founding father. He's calling back to that a little bit, but he's also a liminal figure. He's looking forward to this economic development. He's kind of watching it happen. And his presidency is considered an era of peace, stability, growth, and progress. It's called the era of good feelings. There are things that a lot of things that do happen during his presidency. It's not just a mindless libertarianism. One of which I'll talk about in a minute, that's extremely consequential to the development of America and the debate of slavery. In many ways, America winning or at least not losing the War of 1812 as badly as they could have, and not being punished as badly as they could have, allowed America to focus on different social and economic issues that are kind of dormant before, and then really start to develop nascently in the late 1810s and 1820s when Monroe is in office, and then really take off during the 1830s and 40s. What happens next? I know I say that a lot. That's my catchphrase, I guess. It's funny that a History Channel would use that as his catchphrase, but c'est la vie. Welcome to the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. This is a smoking jacket, not a robe. So Monroe is so popular and things are going so well that he runs unopposed in 1820. There is no Federalist Party. It has fallen apart. And the next election, 1824, will see Democratic Republicans dominating based off of their regional appeal and slight political differences. But the Democratic Republicans have become the predominant party in America, and the Federalists don't have a leg to stand on. Monroe's absolute victory over William Rufus in 1816, his landslide victory in his first term, and then running unopposed, basically destroys the Federalist Party. So Monroe, despite Jefferson and Madison's antagonisms against the party, it's Monroe who actually puts the death nail in federalism as an idea, where Americans are much more interested in kind of a classical liberal, laissez-faire minded approach. And Monroe is seen by many, especially during his first term, as an isolationist president, a president not worried about international issues as much as Madison was. The United States does not fight a war during his presidency other than regional wars with different Native American groups, such as the Seminole. In 1819, Monroe completes the international coastline of the Atlantic coastline for the U.S. This happens with the conquest of Florida. Andrew Jackson, the hero of New Orleans, who also entered the political stage, the American political stage, through his victory at the Battle of New Orleans during the War of 1812 and rose to prominence then, basically uses the pretext of fighting different Seminole Indian tribes to invade Florida and overthrow the Spanish governor. Basically accusing him of corruption and mishandling the government. This looks like war with Spain. Monroe, a lot of people want Jackson to be reprimanded and discharged. But Monroe forgives him, and through the negotiations of his own very tactful Secretary of State, who was also a foreign minister named John Quincy Adams, who also negotiated a big deal, the end of the War of 1812. Once again, this is political foreshadowing at its best in the early 19th century in American history and politics. John Quincy Adams, who is the son of John Adams, negotiates the purchasing of Florida from the Spanish. Former foreign secretary who has made his own political mark through a decision similar to what Monroe did with the Louisiana Purchase 20 years before this. So that's how the United States gets Florida. Basically, Andrew Jackson steals it, and then the Americans buy it from the Spanish, which will be very different from other lands the Spanish own that they take later on, like California and Texas. Monroe sees the acquisition of Florida as one more feather in his cap, but there is a growing issue about the political balance within the United States. The first major debate about slavery had happened when Monroe was young, and that was indeed the Constitutional Convention deciding that a slave would be counted as 3/5 of a person when it came to tallying congressional districts in the South. Now, this obviously sounds horrid to us, and probably is in many, many ways, but the Founding Fathers, especially those of the North, advocated for this as a way to limit the political power in the House of Representatives by Southerners and by people who would continue to support slavery. There had been a continual balance ever since then with the slave trade, with the Americans stopping the purchase of slaves internationally in 1807 or 1808. I think it's 1807. So during Jefferson's presidency, when Monroe was a rising political star. Now, the president will deal with the new issue, and that is the balance of power between the slave and the free states. Now, the way it had worked is basically the slave states of the past, they both got 2 senators, as did all of these states. And there had been a perfect balance between slave and free states in the Senate, where the House of Representatives had been balanced and would eventually tilt towards the Northerners because they would experience a population boom in the next couple of decades. So Monroe, I'll change the picture so it's a little bit, so we get a little bit of difference. I'm going to be using this very famous painting later. But Monroe is a slave owner. He is a plantation owner, just like Madison with Montpelier, Washington with Mount Vernon, and Jefferson with Monticello. I forget the name of his estate, but it's not as big or as impressive as any of those, but it is an important thing. So what happens next? Monroe sees a big challenge to the balance of power between the equal number of free and slave states, which had been kind of one after another during the first 30 years of American history since Washington had become president. He deals with a challenge when Missouri wants to enter the country. Missouri is a western state. It is a growing state. It is a place for pioneers and settlers who are going to chart the trails of the new Louisiana territory that was purchased thanks to his mediation 15 years before, almost 20 years before. But Missouri wants to enter the Union as a slave state. And the question now becomes, there was the Mason-Dixon line, which obviously divided the North and the South in many, many ways. And slavery had always been tolerated in new states south of that line, like Alabama or Mississippi, which had become states early in his presidency. But with Missouri becoming a state, you now had a state that was above that line, but was also would also shift the balance in the Senate towards more southern slave states than northern free states. Most northern states by this time had abolished their slaves, by the way. Eventually, Henry Clay, who is on the political rise, steps in. And Clay, who had been one of the war hawks who had pushed the United States into the War of 1812, proposes the Compromise of 1820. And basically, the Compromise of 1820 says that states south of Missouri will be slave states in the future. Territories north of Missouri will be free states when they come into the Union, which is advantageous for the free states because most of the territories were north of Missouri and the line. So Missouri becomes the line. Any state south of there is slave. Any state north of there in the future is free. There's very little territory the U.S. owns at this time that is south of there other than the Indian Territory of Oklahoma, land that I said would be ostensibly used for relocated natives later on. This is also met with the compromise that Missouri could become a slave state and enter the Union, and Maine would enter as a free state to balance the equation. So Missouri and Maine both become states. Monroe signs the legislation, and this seems to put the issue to bed somewhat. But the issue of the slavery divide, the growing moral questions of slavery, will continue even after the passage of the Compromise of 1820, or what's called the Missouri Compromise. So it's a diplomatic and thoughtful policy that underscores Monroe's presidency in many ways. A thoughtful time with with a lot changing, but not much changing. Throughout Monroe's presidency, America is growing and developing, and things are being figured out and developed socially, politically, and economically. New technology is helping a lot with that. So there's a lot of changes that are happening during the Monrovian presidency. By the way, I'll come to that in a second. That name might sound familiar to you, Monrovia. There's a lot of changes that are happening, but they're happening subtly and slowly. So Monroe doesn't oversee this transformational change in American history like a Washington, Lincoln, or Kennedy presidential figure. But he does see this time of steady growth and development, and he doesn't run into any major problems. There's two more things to discuss about his presidency. First off, Monroe, probably his most famous contribution in foreign policy, kind of sets the stage for how America will interact with the rest of the world for the following century. The Europeans had remodeled their entire foreign policy structure following the defeat of Napoleon. And the basic way they had set it up, it's called the Concert of Powers. But basically, the Europeans would not allow anyone to build a large-scale empire like Napoleon had on the continent. But this left them free to colonize other portions of the world. This allowed the British to use their vast sea power and mercantile influence to colonize India and later Africa. The French will go into northern Africa, going across the Mediterranean to do so. It will allow for the Germans to eventually consolidate into their own empire, and it will allow the Russians to kind of try to determine things in the Balkans. But people will go elsewhere to colonize, is basically the message after Napoleon is defeated. That if you want to build an empire, you have to build it internationally. This leads to efforts. This really hurts Spain, who has lost most of its empire. Spain was semi-conquered by Napoleon. He puts his brother Joseph in charge, and the Spanish royal family is deposed. And this allows many of the Latin American countries to fight for their independence and gain it. Mexico. Someone mentioned Simón Bolívar. If they're still here, well, this is a little bit of talk about Simón Bolívar. Simón Bolívar is a leader, general during Monroe's presidency who helps overthrow Granada, New Granada as it was called, and some of these ancient, and the Viceroyalty of Peru, and these ancient, or these centuries-long colonies that the Spanish had in order to create new countries. And one of them is named after him, and that's where we get the country Bolivia, by the way. The Spanish and the British see, following Napoleon's defeat, a chance to reestablish their authority over these lands. Much of South and Central America has gained their freedom and independence, but these are weak countries that are just barely getting started. They are in the middle of a power vacuum, so both Britain and the Spanish try to colonize certain areas, and this is when Monroe steps in with a very declarative statement, and whatever impact it has, as people on this channel often debate, the Monroe Doctrine is one of the most crucial foreign policy declarations in American, if not world history, because it basically is the first time, and the United States will do this many other times, where the United States decides to speak on behalf of the Western Hemisphere, or the New World, if you want to call it that. The hemispheres are North and South, but if you want to say Western Hemisphere, the Western world, the United States speaks on behalf of it in opposition to the Old World. Basically, the Monroe Doctrine, which is written by John Quincy Adams, is a speech delivered to Congress which declares that the United States will not tolerate the colonization of South America by any European power. Now, there are exceptions to this. The British and the French both will try their hand at colonization. The Americans sometimes intervene to stop this. The enforcement of the Monroe Doctrine is spotty for the next century, but it does create an interesting moment where Monroe's presidency had been kind of tame in the sense of foreign policy. Now you have the United States just 10 years after losing to the British, telling the British and the other Europeans, don't come over here. Don't colonize. Let these countries have their independence. You stay on your half of the world, we'll stay on our half of the world. And this is without any input from the Latin American countries themselves, or from Mexico, or Canada is still owned by the British at this time. But it's an incredible feat. It's a huge act of daring by a man who is known for being very hands-off and mild-mannered. Monroe is a very quiet guy in his personal life. He isn't the intellectual titan of James Madison or Thomas Jefferson. He isn't the bombastic figure of George Washington, or the men who come after him like Andrew Jackson. He's kind of, from what I have understood, shy and quiet, but amiable, likable, and a very hands-off manager. And he'd done this, and he'd allowed America to grow and shape itself economically, technologically, and socially in many ways during his presidency. And now, near the very end of his presidency, he makes this bold assertion about American foreign policy that will be the way America operates in the Western Hemisphere for the next 2 centuries. The United States has still never recovered from Monroe taking it out of that box and recovered or adjusted, in the sense that the United States has felt the need in many, many times, for better or for worse, to speak on behalf of the rest of the world, of the Western world, including Latin America. Let me see here. Monroe's presidency ends on a high note with a foreign policy declaration. And it's a teaching that will be extrapolated and expanded upon by future presidents like Theodore Roosevelt and Harry Truman to justify the United States' continual involvement in South American countries, where America almost seems, in many ways, like the colonizers, as well as the rest of as much as the British or the Spanish were. How does Monroe's presidency end? Well, it ends on good terms, but Monroe is popular. He probably could have won a 3rd term easily. You're a little late, but it's good to see you, Hars, my wonderful moderator. And you'll have to go back and rewatch this, because I know you were the one who asked for James Monroe. But anyways, Monroe ends his presidency with a lot of popularity. He could have easily gotten another term, but following the footsteps of Jefferson, Madison, and Washington, he bows out and retires to Virginia. Monroe's presidency had been extremely successful. There's no doubt about it. His legacy is that of an underrated president because he is surrounded by such titans of the presidential field as Washington and Jefferson, and soon after him will be Andrew Jackson, who is, of course, going to make a huge stamp on American history. Monroe's presidency is like that of a William McKinley or a James Knox Polk, where if you really have a niche understanding of American history and the development of American society, you can realize how impactful and great these presidents actually were. You could say that Monroe is to the 19th century what Dwight Eisenhower is to the 20th century, America's most underrated president. He accomplished a lot by not doing much, but he was doing plenty sitting back. He creates a very paradoxical administration that's actually extremely successful. You gotta really hand it to the guy. Now, of course, the moral questions about James Monroe is he tolerated slavery, he owned slaves, and he continued the system that promoted and perpetuated slavery, as well as seizing land from Indians and continually fighting them. The stealing of Florida is not something that America has criticized as much as it is for its actions in California or Texas, but obviously is something that could be seen as questionable. Although Monroe wasn't directly responsible for that, he didn't mind the benefits of it, just like the rest of the founding fathers. Most of them didn't seem to mind the benefits of having slaves, even if they were theoretically opposed to the institution of slavery. So, what happens next? Like I say all the time, Monroe retires. His post-presidential life is quiet. He works with the University of Virginia a little bit, Jefferson's founding school. Monroe deals with a lot of debt, though. He doesn't have a luxurious retirement. He has to sell a lot of his property. His wife dies, and he's forced to move in with his daughter at the end of his life. I believe she lives in New York. And like I mentioned at the very beginning, a fun fact or an interesting fact about James Monroe, he is the last president to die on July 4th. He dies July 4th, 1831, the 55th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, and 5 years to the day that both Jefferson and Adams, the two signers and writers of the Declaration, had died. So again, another interesting connection to the Founding Fathers, along with his close association with the laissez-faire ideas and classical liberalism of the Virginian dynasty, of which he was the last one. The American politics will be forever different after James Monroe is gone. The last traces of founding fathers are gone from the American political scene, and Monroe wasn't that much of a founding father to begin with. He's kind of an echo of them in some ways, and like I said, he is a liminal figure in American political history. But liminal figures, as they often tend to do, tend to be extremely impactful, even in a subtle way. You could argue that William McKinley, who was assassinated, is a similar president in that he is underrated and he is liminal, bridging the gap into the 20th century, the way Monroe bridges the gap from an early America to a developing pioneer America. By the time his presidency is over, the northeastern part of the United States is industrializing, the West is being explored, the pioneer craze is starting to kick up, and the moral debate of slavery is starting to heat up as well. The political landscape has changed immensely. This is the man who slayed the Federalist Party and became an extremely successful president who got a lot of what he wanted done because he had such political hegemony. It's hard to think of a president being comparable in the modern sense to James Monroe. The American president has become exceptionally powerful. Monroe is powerful in that he is not powerful. And that's what I really admire about him, is the ability, and this is something that you could say for all five of the men who were the first founders. These were not politicians, but statesmen, and wanted to do the right thing of holding the system together and letting it grow. And they were not power crazed or power hungry. Some of them made actions that were quite powerful and quite contrary to their notions of political independence and the rights of man. John Adams and the Alien Sedition Acts come to mind. Jefferson's purchase of Louisiana without senatorial consent is a huge issue in in the debate of the balance of powers. Madison's court battles, Monroe himself with the Missouri Compromise, and with the candor and the gall to speak for not just his continent, but for the continent to the south, is something that that wouldn't have been envisioned when the Declaration was signed. But Madison did it, or Monroe did it, and he did pretty interestingly for the most part. So Anyways, so Monroe's presidency, I think, is not looked at. It's not that it's not. It's usually looked at pretty favorably by historians. It's just not looked at enough. So hopefully, you've been able to look at his presidency and his life and his legacy a little bit more, and you've been able to learn something. And if you have, I would encourage you to check out more of the content on this channel, because we are talking about stuff that people don't always focus on, and we try to be as dutiful and detailed as we possibly can be, and we are also completely open to fact checking and all of that. So if there's anything that I said today that is incorrect, please feel free to fact check me. I will be happy to be proven wrong about that if I am indeed wrong. It's better to do that than to continue in blissful ignorance while miseducating people, so and misinforming them. But yeah, James Monroe's presidency, highly recommend. Check it out, learn more, watch my video on him, look at my tier rankings on presidents. Harsh, if you could put the video on the tier rankings of American presidents, that would be great, so people can get a better view of how I judge American presidents, and they can learn more about James Monroe, because I talk about him, obviously. But thank you very much for the live stream. We've got about 15 minutes left until we get to an hour, so if you have questions about history or social studies, I'd be happy to answer them. Hopefully the audio and the feed is better than yesterday. I made some adjustments, and I've got a new mic that I'm getting. I'm getting a retro style 1940s mic. All the money, by the way, if you give a super chat or you become a member, all the money that we use on this channel goes back into the channel to make things better, like our new laptop and stuff. We'll be doing Discord stuff later this week. We also, of course, have the live stream for members only tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. So this might be a time for my moderators to become members, and they can join us there, or I can give access to moderators, I think. But yes, I'll be answering questions about history and social sciences. I'll be looking through the chat. And yes, controversial tier list of U.S. presidents, to say the least. I got in a lot of trouble for that one. What do you think about the country of Liberia? What can we learn from its history? Oh, thank you for us. I mentioned Monrovia. I didn't mention this interesting fact. Monroe is one of the biggest supporters of what was called the American Colonization Society, which was an organization that took freed slaves and returned them to Africa. Monroe, like many of the other founding fathers, believed that the freed slaves were not capable of living on their own. They did not have the skills or education necessary to actually manage their lives freely and independently should they gain their freedom. The tension with former slave owners and the racism that was becoming more and more apparent would only make it more difficult. So believing that the slaves were racially inferior but also lacking in proper skills, many of the founding fathers believed it would be better if they were freed and sent back to Africa. And the Colonization Society was one of Monroe's favorite organizations. And his repopulation of Africa with freed slaves led to the formation of the country of Liberia, and was one of the only countries that wasn't colonized by the Europeans because America guaranteed its freedom. It really has never been an American colony, and Liberia's capital, which was, I think, first built in 1822, 1823, when he was still president — I was wrong about that. In a previous live stream I said he was dead — is called Monrovia for that reason. It is named after James Monroe. He is the only American president to have a foreign capital named after him. Isn't that cool? Anyways, since you know history, tell me what I did yesterday. Well, you were here asking me how I remember all of this. Was it a private organization? I think it was a contractor. I'm not sure. Monroe was a Democratic Republican. They would not have responded to the term Democrat. In fact, Jefferson called them Republicans. They believe, and they would not be considered Democrats by today's standards necessarily. Did James Monroe support agrarianism since he was from the southern states, or did he push northern industrialism and northern tariffs? I believe he did have some tariffs and things like that, but he's not a Federalist. I think he had a very laissez-faire approach to the economy, and his idea was if it's making America wealthy and powerful and prosperous, these new inventions and these newfangled machines are fine. So he was clearly pro-yeoman farmer, pro the ideal of the small town, small farm American being the ones who should determine the fate of America. This is Jefferson's vision. But he's not opposed to the developments in machinery and industrialization that had become quite inevitable by the 1810s. Are you mad at southern states for seceding from the Union? No, the North beat them in the war. So the United States has won the Civil War, by the way, if you didn't know that. What did John Quincy Adams in the South think of Monroe's death? John Quincy Adams, I think, really admired Monroe. Andrew Jackson, like he always did, claimed to be Jefferson's successor, and Jefferson claimed that Jackson was a problem. But I think a lot of people really respected James Monroe. It was hard to find an enemy of James Monroe. So, I'm going back and looking at the chat, but please drop your questions in the chat, and I will answer them when I can. Where's the National Socialist known as Harry? Funny, he would be here correcting me, saying, oh, well, the Monroe Doctrine did nothing, and the British controlled South America, and everybody in South America loves the British, because everybody loves the British, even all of those people that hate them. Yeah. I did a video. It's got some attention. There have been 22 countries that Britain has not invaded, occupied, colonized, or tried to take over. 22. There are hundreds of countries. And there are countries that no longer exist, that did exist, Rhodesia is an example of them, but the British colonized, or tried to. I don't know about Monroe freeing his slaves. Merry Christmas. We're still in the Christmas season. Lincoln censored telegraphs, seized newspapers, banning reporting, allowing military trials of civilians, definitely not freedom of speech. Do you think Lincoln would have done that if he was president when there was no civil war and there weren't hundreds of thousands of people trying to destroy the republic? Gee, I don't know. We literally won a war against Mexico and paid them money for the California and other states, but okay. True. But a lot of people see it as stealing. So there's controversy with America's acquisitions of Texas and the Southwest, but not of Florida. Not the same way. Let me see here. If it were ChatGPT, he would be stating more sentences with, this was not. True, it's not ChatGPT. I'm flattered that people think I'm using a script or ChatGPT, but it's not. It's off the cuff. I don't do notes. I'll do scripts sometimes for videos, but I don't do notes. Should start taxing people who use the internet. Well, that would hurt me, so I don't like that. Did no one even knows who Monroe is? Leave the guy alone. No, people don't know who James Monroe is, but hopefully you know now. America is the greatest country on earth. We did so much in so little time. Arguably, yeah. You're kind of dressed like Hugh Hefner. That's why I go by History Hefner, comrade. Marilyn Monroe was murdered. Yes, possibly by the Kennedys. Tariffs were the main form of economic revenue for the government at this time. Let me see. The War of 1812 was not a draw. Men can save more water if we urinated in our sinks. Thank you. I'm surprised you're not president. Let me see here. Your moderators blocked me. I'm sorry about that. Because he is teaching history doesn't need your own original thoughts. True. Let me see. And thank you, Bill and Ricky, for being here. Members with their own emojis, they get other benefits as well. Let me see here. The Russians helped America win the Civil War. That's true. Alexander II was very in favor of liberty because he had freed the serfs. Thank you, John. I really appreciate that apology. It's a green screen. I have another green screen that I'm going to start using with my laptop, but this is just my phone's green screen. When you stream, you can use the green screen on YouTube. Is it true that George Washington had slave chief? He might have. I don't know. Can Napoleon beat Lugia? Sure. Do you think the United States of America will have another revolution? It already had two revolutions, the American Civil War and the American Revolution. He died of tuberculosis. Do you know if it's true if Honey Baker got an ice skating rink donated to him for being a hockey player? Isn't he a football player? I don't know. Was he a Mason? I don't know if James Monroe was a Mason. Washington was. Franklin was. I haven't researched the Count of St. Germain. Who says I went to church today? Hello, brother. How are you doing today? Thank you, Samuel, for joining us from England. What if the Louisiana Purchase never happened? It'd be interesting to see how America expands, maybe northward into Canada. It's just Americans have it in their best interest to gain freedoms and expand. That's what they do best. So it's hard to picture America without the Louisiana Purchase. And I did answer about Simon Bolivar, and I've caught up all the way back to the chat. Now let's see what questions we have now in the chat today. We had people saying mean stuff, and I just wanted to see if I could readdress that. Do you read books? Yes, I do. The USSR doesn't exist. Not anymore, and everybody's mourning that for some reason because they're stupid. Has there ever been a war where a country basically destroyed itself to not get invaded? Oh, the Russians burned their capital in 1812 to prevent Napoleon from taking it. Federalist Papers set up the fundamental infrastructure to fight the Civil War and once matured the Spanish-American War. That's true. If I hear Harry talk about the Monroe Doctrine wrong, I will argue with him worse than I did you. Well, thank you for screaming that. Is Trump aiming for a neo-Monroe Doctrine? No. The Americans have been... Teddy Roosevelt already did that 100 years ago. Trump is basically just saying, we're in charge. We've gone from the Monroe Doctrine to basically saying we can determine the affairs and the effects of Central and South America. But it would be interesting if the Monroe Doctrine is mentioned in the political and national debate as a justification for what Trump is doing, because it was a justification for Theodore Roosevelt fighting a revolution against the Colombians to get Panama so he could build the Panama Canal. Do you think America is the greatest country in the world? I think America's accomplishments historically are remarkable. That's almost a political opinion, and I usually charge for those. I think it's definitely got advantages that other places don't have, and it has advantages that other places never have had, and it's had advantages that some places will never have. And I think proportionally, pound for pound, the United States is as powerful in proportion as the Roman Empire was, if not more. Is U.S. before and now just a terrorist state masquerading as a democracy? How is it a terrorist state? I mean, there are plenty of terrible and terrorist things the Americans have done. I can understand that. The Federalist Papers were a huge, long, lasting contribution. True, thanks to James Madison. Are you mad at sovereign states? All right, already answered that. So I think I've caught up to the chat. Let me see. Why do Nick Fuentes say things like whites who have ancestry from Revolutionary War and Americans Vivek Ramaswamy had to reply to J.D. Vance because of Nick? What exactly is the Revolutionary War? The Revolutionary War, Jaden, and it's good to see you, by the way, is the American colonists, tired of paying taxes without being represented in government, rebelled for representative reasons, not tax purposes. And it was a movement that inspired a war. James Monroe fought in that war. He's in the painting with Washington that I showed earlier, supposedly, crossing the Delaware. Now, did he cross the Delaware with Washington? We don't know, but he was there. He was fighting under Washington during the American Revolution. He was injured at Monmouth, I think, which was after this, which took him out of the fighting and almost killed him. But the truth of the matter is, people believe that the people who came to the United States, many of whom were Angloid, or British, you could say, English, Scottish, Irish, Welsh, although the Irish are not British, built and founded this country between 1600 and 1775. And everybody since then is an immigrant who came into an established country and then assimilated, bringing their own culture, but they're not the same thing. And the most recent strain of immigrants, many of them are from Asia and South Asia, and so Vivek Ramaswamy and Mrs. Vance get a lot of pushback from white purists who basically think that the United States, that conflate the message of the American culture and ethos, which is Western, Judeo-Christian, ethically inspired Judeo-Christian, and politically inspired by the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and the ancient Greeks. They conflate that with race. For them, it's the race is what causes it. And the fact that white Europeans happen to be the ones that built and settled the United States, for them makes white Europeans superior, and makes other races not trustworthy. So South Indians didn't found the United States. South Indians didn't build the United States. South Indians haven't fully assimilated, and they're a relatively new group. So it's just neo-nativism. It's just the fear of the other. It's xenophobia. It doesn't matter how conservative that Indian person is. They're an Indian. They're not trustworthy. They're not part of the whites that built this country. So it's a conflation of American values and principles with whiteness, which, funnily enough, which is a word, by the way, sounds like it's not a word, but it is a word. These people rose up in opposition to what they called the woke, which identifies whiteness as a problem. They see whiteness as the solution, when most people who are not on these extremes tend to see whiteness and blackness as things that don't exist, that are made up categories by people who want to amplify racial tensions. Go into depth about the Monroe Doctrine. If they are doing trade agreements with other countries, doesn't that debunk the objective? The doctrine was for colonization. It says the American countries are not to be considered the subject of any further European colonization. They weren't opposed to trade, or even influence. There was a Masonic, the Hungary versus the Ottomans, over and over. Well, the Austro-Hungarians and the Turks actually fought with each other, trying to crush the Serbs and the Greeks in the middle, and the Russians and the British stopped them, and that was during the Great War, or what you call World War I, what I call World War II. There was a Masonic temple next to my previous house. What do they do there? Different rites and actions. A lot of them are very much involved in community work, and are similar into fraternal lodges. Do you think Germans would take a bunch of Prevatin for? No. But there was amphetamines used by the Nazis. Are you familiar with the story of Persian constitutional revolution? A little bit. Is that right before the Islamic Revolution? Can you talk about Masons and who they were? Yeah, it's people want to think that secretive groups that operate without borders control the world. And I think there's something to it that you have people who are very powerful, who kind of run in the same circles. This is Jeffrey Epstein 101, who have an influence on international politics. And they won't talk about this stuff in public, but they will make plans secretly that kind of unfold in public over the space of time and years. What is your cheapest tier of membership? I think it's Friendly Historian. And then I forget, it's like $4 a month. You can be proud to be atheist. You can be proud to be Muslim, Christian, Buddhist, whatever, just as long as you're proud to be a friendly neighborhood historian. Can you think of a mystery in history that no one knows the answer to? Ooh, that's a good one. What happened at Roanoke? How did James Monroe help the nation after the War of 1812? Most presidents would want to do a step-by-step plan to heal the nation. Was that just the air of good feelings? Well, I was talking about this earlier during the lecture, Harsh, but truthfully, James Monroe, maybe his best quality was his hands off. He basically believed that the nation should heal itself through its own technological, social, and economic development, which it certainly did with the rise of industrialism in the North, expansion in the West, and the beginnings of what became known as the American system. Kennedy was killed by CIA? Possibly. The Zimmerman, that's another mystery we don't know. The Zimmerman telegraph story is weird to me. Why would Mexico listen to Germany and attack America? And why just a telegraph is a good reason to declare war on Germany? It was the unrestricted submarine warfare along with the telegraph, which basically said that if the United States and Germany got involved in a war, and if Mexico got involved in the war, Germany would help the Mexicans retake the Southwest. And the Americans saw this as there was a lot of pressure to join the Allies following the Lusitania. The Germans continuing to sink ships, continued to make enemies, like with China and Argentina, for instance. So at this time, it was seen as a good idea for the United States to get involved in the war, and the public opinion had turned from neutrality towards leaning towards the Allies. There were people who believed before that many of them of German ancestry that the Central Powers were better. And so there was actually a lot of debate about who's going to win this war. But most Americans had favored isolationism, and after the war would favor it again. Let me see. Has there ever been a war where a country basically I mentioned the Russians. I'm trying to think of a better example where they gutted themselves. Scorched earth, and the Russians did that over and over again against the Turks and the Swedes and the French. And then against the Germans in the last World War. Is this a Christian country that make Christian laws into Congress, or is it a Masonic country that benefits Masons? Look at our monument. There was nothing Christian at all Masonic. Yes, I love this argument, the Masonic origins of America, because George Washington was supposedly a Freemason. Now, have there been Freemasons in American history? Sure. Have they had influence in government? Sure, why not? I know, Sabir, that you're kind of on the conspiracy side of things. But the truth of the matter is, most of the architecture that is, look at all of these paganic symbols and Masonic stuff, most of it is neoclassical. And neoclassical art and architecture of the late 18th century, which was common in Europe and common in the United States. You just look at a painting by Jacques-Louis David or Delacroix, was heavily inspired by a renewed interest in Greco-Roman architecture, art, and philosophy. The political philosophies of people like Aristotle were extremely influential on Thomas Jefferson. That's why he says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness instead of property. Property is Lockean, pursuit of happiness or virtue is Aristotelian. So they were heavily influenced by the Greeks and the Romans, and they wanted it to be clear to you. Washington's hero was Cincinnatus, the gentleman farmer who led the Roman army and then gave up power. These men were far more influenced by the Greeks and the Romans than they were by the Masons. Norway's fantastic. Gotek, it's great to have you. Let me see. Can you give a mystery in history? Okay, I didn't answer. Why is it stupid to mourn the death of the USSR? I feel like the Cold War led to more advancements. Well, I guess China feels that function now. Well, the thing is, Americans always have to have their bogeyman, but the truth of the matter is the vast majority of people who lived under the Soviet Union are probably pretty glad that it fell in one form or another and that the Cold War ended. And Russia is not in a much better position, but you have a bunch of satellite states that are free and independent now, and there's always problems when a major power source like the Soviet Union collapses. It's an empire. And the empire that collapses leads to a downturn. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily a bad thing. Let me see. Can you please talk about the role of Mason in our history during the Civil Wars and organization in your next video? No, because I don't know enough about it. I don't think it's that big of an influence. Yes, and here I am. I said Judeo-Christian, and now somebody's saying that Judeo-Christian is nonsense. No, Judeo-Christian is not nonsense. I am assuming you are taking a problem with the Judeo part of that whole thing. Somebody recently suggested that I read the Noahide laws, because this is something that is really, really captivating far-right loonies. That the Noahide, that the American government secretly became ruled by Orthodox Jews in the 1990s and allowed Orthodox Jews to implement their morality and force it on the American people in violation of the Establishment Clause. The Noahide laws might as well be, which are ancient Jewish moral principles, are totally based in the Ten Commandments, which America, as a traditionally Christian nation, tends to follow and like. So I don't even get that. My friend Connor says that America was founded by colonizers and not immigrants. Settlers, I like the settlers and then immigrants. I like both. Why not? Why the dichotomies? Why labels on everything? I like having two empires at odds. It increases innovation. It does, but innovation works during peacetime too. Xenophobia is bad. Xenophobia is natural, but it doesn't mean that it's good. Not everything that's natural is good. It is natural in human history to fear the outsider, whether they're in your own country, your own state, or from another area of the world. We've had ways it used to be just warfare, violence, and fear was how you worked. But now we still have that, but we also have more, mundane ways of xenophobia, of drawing a line between us and them. And us and them, I think, is natural to humans. So my Steelers lost today to the Browns. That's football. That's a defanged version of war that has a psychology of competition and otherness, but without necessarily anyone getting hurt intentionally. Except if you're a Dodger fan, then you just hurt people. Was slavery a necessary evil due to the importance of tobacco, wheat, and cotton being exported to sustain the American economy? That's how the founders thought, and they believed that the American economy, especially if it would develop industrially as England was doing, would eventually move on from needing it. But it became so entrenched in the society that the Civil War was required to take it out. But believe me, the founders believed that slavery would be dead. And then the cotton gin changed all that. Was Roman Empire racist to dark skin? Yes, a little bit, but not as much as you think. And they definitely saw inferiority by the North Africans. The Carthaginians were their main opponents, although the Carthaginians are not Africans, they're Canaanites. President Lincoln signed the Revenue Act of 1862 into law and helped finance the Civil War. This legislation created the nation's first federal income tax, which was voluntary. It wasn't permanent, and it was voluntary. Calm down, Steve. The first income tax really doesn't hit until 1913. Though you only heard the last 7 seconds. I was saying with whiteness and blackness that these two categories don't exist and are made up by people on extremes who get all the attention and don't understand that these are just ways that they divide people. What do you think of the Red Baron? Von Richthofen, horribly emasculated and cartoonized, if that's even a word, by the Peanuts. He was actually a fierce fighter, and they didn't know how to defeat him, and eventually they shot him down. Let me see here. Friendly history. What do you think the scary parallels of the Hartford Convention and South Carolina's succession crisis? Don't know enough about the Hartford Convention. South Carolina tried to secede when they didn't like tariff laws in the early 1830s. That's interesting. And Andrew Jackson forced them not to secede, even threatening to hang his vice president. Tariffs and threatening to hang your vice president. Oh yeah, that's for all of you who think that Donald Trump is some sort of nightmarish person who we've never seen anything like it before. We've seen something even worse. Jackson personally threatened to hang his vice president. Trump never did that. Cole turned on his vice president, sure, but threatened to hang? No. Doctor Who, what where? Great to see you as always. Why does sovereignty matter when countries are created by imaginary lines and boundaries? They're not imaginary. Look at the Berlin Wall. Look at the wall between Rafah and Egypt. They're not imaginary. They can be very, very real. Sovereignty is... And this is what Westphalia does at the end of the 30 Years' War, establishes the nation state. A nation is a country, which is the land that is filled by a particular people with a particular culture and a particular government. That is the nation state. And that nation state demarks itself in an us versus them mentality, but far less violent than it used to be, of we are this, you are that. And that is okay, you are that, but we like that we are this. So we are allowed to say we are this and you are not. Countries are created by conquest, by the cultivation of culture. They aren't created by imaginary boundary lines. I don't know what ERB is. Let me see. Industrial Revolution happened roughly around 1903. Iran became constitutional monarchy instead of an absolutist one till 1953. Oh, interesting. I did not know that. Thank you for sharing that. Good to see you fresh. Always a pleasure. And yes, History Hefner in my robe today. Why were the carriers out on their own southwest of Hawaii on December 6th? Well, this is where you can get in all sorts of conspiracy theories of people who basically say that FDR was asking for it. The FDR was not asking for it. But they didn't expect, most of them, those carriers didn't expect the attack. President is between Lincoln and Washington, but TR is high up there. Yes, those three are probably my three favorite. But Monroe is a personal favorite of mine. I think he's really, really interesting. What is Prussia? Are using Prussian school system or Chinese examination? I don't know enough about that. Prussia is a region in the northeastern part of Germany that becomes the most powerful force in German politics and eventually unites Germany into an empire in the 19th century. Let me see. I'm an immigrant, but I feel sympathetic towards the xenophobic people, especially people who are Islamophobic. People, I don't like phobias. I don't like Islamophobic people. I don't like xenophobia. I don't like homophobia. It's not that I don't like the people. I don't like what they think. I don't like any of the phobias, but that's because I'm Western. Discrimination against other people who are different than you, even without skin, even on the basis of someone who has the same skin color or the same language, is so common in history. But the majority of history is xenophobia. Inclusivity and multiculturalism are new ideas. Now, some societies have been able to be pretty cosmopolitan, metropolitan, diverse, and tolerant. The Muslims of the Abbasid Caliphate, the Roman Empire even, could make some good arguments. The Mongols were good at tolerating people as long as they could control them. But that doesn't mean that diversity and multiculturalism was our strength. Certainly wasn't in human history. That's a new concept, saying diversity is our strength. So there's a difference between discriminating because you're worried about danger or differences being incompatible, and of course seeing someone as inferior because they are different. And othering someone as the enemy and being suspicious of them. That's where it becomes racial, xenophobic, Islamophobic, all of that stuff. Americans couldn't have favored isolationism because of the additional states that accrue throughout history progression. That's impossible, sir. Yeah, I understand that argument that America is not isolationist because it conquers the continent, but isolationism is almost uniquely defined in terms of the United States' relationship to Europe and Europe's empires in the early 20th century and then to the entire world during the Cold War. Neo-isolationism of the Tucker Carlson variety basically says who cares about these countries in the middle of the world, except Qatar, which he cares about a lot for some reason, and Russia. Oddly enough. But my whole point being that Americans are isolationists. They're expansionists, but they are isolationists in the sense that they don't want, and Washington laid this out in his farewell address, they don't want, and they haven't wanted, intervention from other countries. Europeans, and this is partially just a geographical phenotypic fact, by its very definition, America was more isolationist than Europe. It's across the ocean. But you also have the European countries are closer together. The United States has so much space spread out between it. It is so much larger than many of the European countries, except Russia, that isolationism from other countries makes more sense. Less contact with Mexico and Canada compared to France, Germany, and Britain makes sense. Although there's plenty of contact nowadays, but I'm talking about in the 19th and 20th centuries. So that is why it's so incredible that Monroe speaks for the continents when he issues the Monroe Doctrine. The first American president to meet with the president of Mexico, William Howard Taft in 1909, met with Porfirio Diaz. That's 130 years after America was founded. That is 80 years after Mexico was founded. And that's right before Mexico becomes kind of a worrisome point for the United States during the Second World War, what you call World War I. Can you explain a little bit who were the Freemasons and why there were so many strange theories about it? There's theories about the Freemasons being the ones who created the entire government, banking, and monetary system. There's tie-ins to Jewish conspiracy theories about the Knights Templar, that after they were destroyed, they eventually recompartmentalized, became secular, practiced their satanic and occultic notions about them and rumors about them, that they practiced satanic rites, blasphemies against Christianity, that they couldn't practice in public, so they practiced it in private. But basically, they were a secret society and an organization that was hell-bent on geopolitical influence, but also secret ceremonies and rites and ideas, as well as different ethical practices that were very common, and were kind of just a secret club for rich, powerful white people, white men in particular, during the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. Gentleman farmer, yep. That's what Washington believed himself to be, or wanted to be. Did you know that if Iran did not have political problems, it would have a very beautiful country? Oh, Iran is gorgeous. Persia is gorgeous. Let me see. Did the Soviet Union collapse due to adapting capitalistic tendencies they eventually adopted? No. No. In fact, communism as a cultural phenomenon lasted in China because of the adoption of more open market principles. I'm not saying that capitalism always works and communism never works. Actually, communism basically never works. But it's not just glazed capitalism, but it is to say that uh, there was more of a mixed economy in places like Cuba and China after some decades. And the Soviet Union actually did that originally with a new economic policy, which actually led to the most prosperous time in Soviet history. Let me see here. I feel like we landed on the moon because we wanted to compete with the USSR. How's the USSR failing a good thing? Well, no, I'm saying that people in the United States lament the fall, people on the political left lament the fall of the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union, they believe, was good and the US was bad. People who lament the fall of the Soviet Union do not do it for the practical purposes of the technological developments that it forced America to do. Yes, America did develop a lot of its technology and its freeway system as a means of war with the Soviet Union or being ready for war. That is a possibility, that perhaps it decentivized America from production. But America's technological development got even greater during the 90s. That's the time of the internet and personal computers. So truth be told, the United States got better, continued technological development. You can incentivize development economically, socially, and technologically in times of peace. And if my lecture today proved anything, I think it proved just that. The Industrial Revolution happens in America after the War of 1812, under James Monroe's hands-off administration. Let me see. They are prepping for Taiwan 2027. Interesting. I'm not surprised that Lockheed Martin would be. Why hippies are still around and they still are ruining America? I don't know about hippies have ruined America. That's just old silent generation right-wing talk. There are plenty of people who love and idealize the counterculture of the 1960s. What did Hitler mean Jews were a race? Like, did Jews look different from blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryans? Could a Jew not have blonde hair, blue eyes? That's why Hitler was an idiot. But the point of the matter is, Jaden, yes, many Jews were blonde-haired, blue-eyed. Many Jews are not racially, are some of the most diverse in the sense of you cannot just, there are people who you can look at them and you can figure out certain features that would tell you this person is Jewish. But there are plenty of Jews, but there are black Jews, there are Ethiopian Jews, there are, for instance, there are Jews all over the world. There are Jewish communities in the Middle East, the Mizrahim. There are the Sephardic Jews of Spain. There are the Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern Europe that are probably the most well-known Jews because they populated in heavy doses America and later the Holy Land. So, Hitler was trying to make a point that the Jews have a definite phenotype. He was mainly thinking of Hasidic Jews of European origin and Ashkenazi Jews. So, let me see. Culture should be acknowledged. Is Trump the greatest president in history? No. Lincoln trampled the Constitution. Lincoln was fighting a war. Find me a president who didn't trample the Constitution during a war for the nation's soul. And find me a modern American president in the last 100 years who has not trampled the Constitution. Deport Israelis from America. Oh, here we go. They finally showed up, Hearts. We haven't seen the Groypers yet, but they're here today. Friendly history. Do you notice something nice? The stream doesn't have Harry here. It's a lot more normal talking and less arguing here. Until you start arguing with someone. Let me see. Lincoln waged total war on sovereign civilians, ordering the bombardment and burning of cities. Yes. So? Are you doing what Daryl Cooper did with Tucker Carlson about Churchill, where you take the reputation of someone who is almost universally considered a great person and try to destroy them as a warmonger and a tyrant, which is what they try to do with Churchill? Yes, Lincoln made difficult decisions. I don't give Truman a hard time for Nagasaki and Hiroshima. I'm not going to give Lincoln a hard time for what Sherman did in his March to the Sea. I miss Harry too. Weren't the 7 continents united at one point, which buttresses my point that countries are made up of imaginary lines and boundaries? There were no countries in this society. They didn't have a concept of countries. They didn't have a developed language during Pangaea. I don't even know when Pangaea stopped, when continental drift actually recreated the 7 continents. I don't know if Homo sapiens were around. I don't think they were. Not liking other people is just how it is. Thank you for joining us from Russia. My heart broke, but I understand and I want more. We need to get rid of Islam and liberate the Middle East. Or we could liberate the Middle East, liberate the Muslims from radical Islam, and then Islam will be fine. I do the six. Yes, I did. Anyways, Lincoln's administration forced removal and mass executions of Native American warriors. The Native Americans owned slaves and were fighting for the Confederacy. Didn't know that, did you? Russia might be the next high civilization given some time, aren't a part of the... I mean, it depends on how far this BRICS thing goes, but I just don't see it gaining traction. I don't think China really is just in line with everything Russia's doing. I think China has its own designs. Thank you for learning history and English from a different point of view. It's very, very good to have you here. I don't know how to say your name, but it's very good to have you here from Russia nonetheless. And yes, we've gone way over, but I'm almost done. I just want to see if I can catch up to the chat. Things that genuinely unites Americans being attacked, which is foreign conflicts across ideological lines. If China attacks us or Venezuela attacks us, every common American would care more. Not true anymore. America is so jaded after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan that they basically, parts of the media, as well as many people who are opposed to whichever president, it doesn't have to be a Republican or a Democrat, will be rooting for the Venezuelans or rooting for the Chinese. That's how bad it's gotten. The president of the United States bombs a nuclear facility in Iran, and people immediately say it's the cause of a world war and how dare he do it, and it was totally ineffective, which isn't true, by the way. I do daily news segments here on the channel for those of you who are new or don't know, because I believe the news isn't handled right. And so I take my historical lens of objectivity and I apply it to the news. So go check those videos out. I do daily news videos, and sometimes I do compilations and post a long form video of like a week of news. But the truth of the matter is, Americans are just too jaded, and social media has made them they don't have enough attention span to actually root for America properly during a war. It's the same in other countries too. Not so much in places like China and Russia, but in European countries. There's a laziness and a ennui that has set in that's quite interesting to see. Can you talk about the extreme corruption in Ukraine? No election, no journalism. There's no election because of the war. The Ukrainian constitution prevents war from election happening during wartime. That's not Zelensky's fault. There is a suppression of journalism. And again, we'll go back to Steve's point. This happens during war. Lincoln did it. FDR did it. FDR was far more corrupt by this standard than Zelensky is. But we don't call FDR corrupt. I just don't like this disproportionate way we deal with history, geopolitics, because we don't know history. Lincoln, FDR, Theodore Roosevelt, not Theodore Roosevelt, he wasn't really a wartime president. These men acted like dictators. There's no way around it. You don't like it? I get it. It's not what Thomas Jefferson would have wanted, but Thomas Jefferson didn't lead America during a war. Yes, please come back Friday, Saturday, 6 p.m. Eastern, and Sunday for our live stream lecture. And next Sunday's topic you can vote on. I will put it up earlier this week, so you can vote on what topic you would like me to discuss for our first live stream lecture of the new year. Let me see. Nachal. Thank you, G-Man. Well, it's good to have you here, Nachal. What do you think of Italian elite theory? Don't know it. My name is Matthew. Oh, Matthew. Okay, then. Mikal, yeah. Do you consider Thomas Jefferson an idiot for not favoring federal banks, the catalyst intervening macroeconomic dire, and should Alexander Hamilton get more credit? The first part, no, I understand where Jefferson was coming from. The second part, yes, Hamilton should get more credit for it. Not just a musical. Why Scandinavian countries have lowest homeless? Scandinavian countries have a very large welfare state that's able to take care of their poor, their sick, and their dying. Khrushchev was hilarious. Khrushchev was an actor. What if Plaza Accords never took place in 1985? Lord Fisher, I so appreciate you doing the super chat. I don't know what those are. In 1985, I don't know what the Plaza Accords are. But you know what? I'm going to have to look into that. Come back. Don't give a super chat. Ask me about it, and I'll have an answer for you. I don't know enough about it to know what if, but I so appreciate the donation. Anything helps the channel. Yes. Let me see here. Friendly History loves Russian history and has a college degree. Several. Yes. I have my master's my thesis was on Russia's politicking in the 19th century. Hars, put the link to the Russian Tsar's tier ranking video. If you want to see another tier ranking video, or if Matthew wants to learn Russian history from an American perspective, I'm sure he already knows much about it. He probably could be teaching us. He's welcome to watch that video. The interstate system developed during the Eisenhower administration was still and is around for national defense. True. Excluding his Indian Removal Act, would you consider Jackson a good president? No. He destroyed the National Bank, which led to the devastation of the economy under Van Buren. Jackson was a good president in that he inspired people to become strong. He got rid of a national. That's his saving grace. He inspired an entire generation of pioneers, explorers, and settlers. America was strong, prosperous, and expansive during his presidency. But no, the Indian Removal Act, which was horrible, and the destruction of a national bank devastated the economy. Jesus loves me, okay? And yes, there are black Jews. But all Jews are 40th cousins at least. Let me see. As a Norwegian European, the biggest threat to the USA, it's the Democratic Party and the corrupt lying media that fabricated the Russia collusion hoax with the British intelligence agency. It's curious to me that someone from Norway thinks that. Most people I think of when I think of Europeans, I think of people who would be very anti-Trump. Fascinating. Let me see. Under Lincoln, Clement L. Vallandigham, a former Ohio congressman and vocal critic of the war, was arrested for military authorities for an anti-war speech and tried by a military commission. So, I'm not saying that. I've never said Lincoln was perfect, and I've never said that that Lincoln did nothing wrong, and I've never said that he handled the war perfectly. I don't think there's any war that's been handled perfectly. I think it's a disservice and an insult to pretend that there is, especially for Lincoln. Can you be my dad? Sure, when I'm not busy. Andre, you like and subscribe, and I'll be dad. Let me see. Also, based on how your mom looks. But anyways, do Palestinians have Semitic blood? Yes. Some of them. Some of them don't. No man shall take my faith. Better to take my life first. Have fun with that. As a historian, since America failed to annex Canada, if Trump hypothetically was successful in that objective, wouldn't that be a greater accomplishment than Lincoln unifying the Union? Yes, but it won't happen. Trump's already accomplished several things during both terms of his presidency that historically, in the history books, he won't get credit for. Because historians tend to lean to the left, academia tends to lean to the left, and President Trump leans to the right and is such a big oaf in his own way that he's just not going to get credit even for things that he did that were relatively or even pretty marginally successful. Yeah. Let me see here. Yeah. Most of World War II was fought differently than World War I and World War II. Well, there's 3 world wars, so you need to get your numbers right. Tanya, thank you for sending a gift membership, and G-Man, it's great to have you as a member. You can join us for our live stream Q&A for members only tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. So Steve, Jaden, Rodolfo, Hars, you guys are longtime friendly neighborhood historians. This might be the time, although I will try to make it available. And if anyone else wants to become a member and get bonus access, early releases, it'd be great to have you for our live stream tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. Who was the best president? Probably Lincoln. Washington's up there too. Hi, GK. Good to see you. This racist guy. Okay. Thank you for sharing that for us. A small percentage of people read books on Lincoln and the Civil War while in grade school. Yeah, I'm not a small percentage of people. Okay, how do you evaluate Prime Minister Dr. Mohammad Mossadegh, one of the reformers of the Iranian system, had socialistic intentions and ideas, still not a justification, and because of that, the British and the Americans, who were worried that he would nationalize the oil industry, which was huge for the British economy, overthrew him and had him killed. I think MI6 did it, but the CIA was involved too. Are you specifically talking U.S. presidents? It varies in the stream description. This was a live stream lecture on James Monroe. I didn't add a description, Manthan, but I'm answering questions now because we're at the end. I've done about 40 minutes of Q&A on top of the 45 minutes of the lecture. As a historian, if George Washington complied with his constituents to be king, would the trend now prevented less economic slumps due to volatile shift, power dynamics switching from R to D? Not necessarily. Interesting idea. Check out Italian Elite Theory. I enjoyed the stream. Thank you, Jared. Italian Elite Theory and the Plaza. Were you the one who gave a super chat about the Plaza too? In the last live, you talked about a prison as if it's a bad place. What is so bad about free food and free housing? I, for one, and cannot wait to go to prison. People do not learn their lessons in prison. The recidivism rates are crazy, especially in the United States. And of course, prison, you don't have the freedom. You can't leave. I would rather be hungry than not free. So, let me see here. And I do need a new microphone. Although I love this microphone. I really like it. It has noise cancellation, and I'm thinking it's working fine. Boxers or briefs? I'll let you guess. My answer? Smoking jacket. Let me see. I've buried Confederates and Nazis in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Well, you must have been very busy last night, see? I understand how most people think the guy on a 5 is great, but not you. The guy on a 5? What do you mean, Steve? I understand most people think the guy on a 5, oh, on the $5 bill, yeah, is great, but not you. No, I understand history enough to understand complexities and to understand that historical figures are not great. It's one of those memes, and you've seen it before, where you have a sniveling child. No, or you have a sniveling child in the middle, and then you have like the baby with their baby understanding, and then you have like the sage on the left, on the right. It's like usually with a little graph. The baby on the left is like, Lincoln's the best president. Then there's the sniveling one in the middle. Lincoln is a terrible president. Why does anyone like him? And then the sage is like, Lincoln is a good president. The sage and the baby agree. I'd like to think that I'm at the sage position where, yes, I know all the bad stuff, but I don't. But it doesn't necessarily cancel out the good. Why wouldn't you consider FDR to be a great president? I never said he wasn't great. I said he's overrated. People who put him in the top 3, 2, or even 5, I don't think they're right. I think he's edging on the top 10, maybe. What he does during the war is pretty phenomenal, other than imprisoning the Japanese. Go watch my live stream lecture on FDR, where I handle him very fairly. But in my own personal opinion, the New Deal didn't work. FDR is a vicious racist, even by the standards of the 1930s and 40s. And he's a morally compromised individual. His greatest accomplishment is because the United States got pulled out of the Depression because of the war, he's seen as the savior of both, and of course Social Security. Your mother's favorite recipe or your grandmother's? Oh, my mother had this turkey chili with curry influences from India that was fantastic. Do you have a lot of knowledge concerning history? I have a lot of knowledge about everything, but history in particular. Is it true that the Confederates had the best commanders and generals and they lost due to lack of resources? Yes. Go watch my video on Robert E. Lee. It's incredible how much the Confederates had when it came to generals. Joseph Johnston, Stonewall Jackson. They had some great generals. It's pretty impressive. The Confederates are a fascinating people. But the Union Army should have won the war. And eventually you get Grant in there and he's able to really do the damage. And Sherman's just burning the South down. Do you have a favorite sport? I talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers a lot. I love the Steelers. Baseball, not really. Basketball, was a Clippers fan, but not really, not much anymore. Don't ask me the reasons why I follow these teams. Unless you want to give a super chat, then I'll explain in detail. Lincoln wanted blacks to leave the country. Yes, so did James Monroe. Did you not watch the live stream lecture? Logistics skill of Confederates. No, the Union having the better machinery, the better manpower, and the wherewithal killed the Confederacy. It's the same way the United States outlasted the Germans in World War III. Let me see here. No, on a 5 means on the $5 bill. Lincoln. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God. Okay, you're just quoting Christmas stuff. Somebody, by the way, came on, and this is what I wanted to address, and I'd forgotten about it. I wanted to see if I could find the comment, but I think they left in anger. And they've been on the channel before, and they said that I am a genocide denier who makes stuff up and uses ChatGPT. The lecture was about James Monroe, who was the President of the United States from 1817 to 1825, the era of good feelings and all the great stuff that Monroe did. What does that have to do with what's happening in Gaza? There was no Gaza. There was no Israel. There was barely even Palestine in 1825. And the only reason there was Palestine was because the Judean lands had been renamed. There were about 10,000 Jews who lived in Israel in 1820. What does James Monroe have to do with any of that? It's sick the way people are obsessed with this stuff. So, nobody is perfect except for that one guy. Yes, thank you. I am that one guy. Is it true that the Confederates already answered that? Okay, LOL, Confederates lost because they lacked everything. Did Christianity cause a lot of wars? Yes, and so has the lack of Christianity. Religion is just a vehicle by which people express their innermost feelings, emotions, and ideas. Why don't you answer me on this topic? I'm arguing that humanizing Muslims can lead to sympathy to Islam, so it's dangerous. I humanize every human being. Every human being deserves to be humanized and treated with respect and decency. And maybe it's just because I'm a Westerner. I don't know. I think that here's the danger in your theories where you're basically a proud Islamophobe. I understand your concerns with radical Islam, Sharia law, things like that. But have you considered morally and culturally, philosophically, and historically the great things about Islam? But also, have you considered that by dehumanizing the Muslims and by promoting Islamophobia, you are actually no better than them when they dehumanize women, refuse to provide them education, and throw gay people from buildings? Have you thought that you fall into the same trap of dehumanization, and that's not going to win? That's not going to destroy Islam. That's just going to justify Islam ever. And here's the history. Ever since the Hijra, when Muhammad fled Mecca, which didn't exist in the 7th century, but I guess we'll just make it up. And then when Muhammad supposedly fled Mecca at the Hijra, and went to Yathrib, Medina, which did exist, they created a new dynamic for Islam by which Muhammad and Islam saw themselves as the victims, and because they were the victims, they were, no matter how violent or repressive or vengeful they became in their actions, such as the conquest of the Arabian Peninsula in 630 and 631, they were getting revenge. They were getting justice from Allah. So it justified violent jihad. Not regular jihad, violent jihad was justified because of the Hijra, because he played the victim or accepted that victim mentality. And that has been part of, I think, Islam, and that is why radicals to this day justify the violence by saying they are doing what Allah would want them to do, because that's what Muhammad thought with the Hijra. So here's a little history for you. Yeah, Big Ben was a great player. I'm a Yankee, John Brown's greatest grandson. That's fascinating. Ask me about the Civil War. We'll have to talk about John Brown and his crazed eyebrows. Mossadegh did nationalize the British oil company, but due to U.S. and Britain unified effort to force countries not to import oil from there, it was an epic fail, plus they couldn't refine it. Yeah, and then they killed him. Let me see. Fair enough. Also, what do you consider to be Trump's marginal successes? Ending several different wars. I think hitting the Iranian nuclear program. His first term economy, as well as I remember it, was pretty decent for the most part. Trump looked like he was on the road to re-election in 2020 before COVID became a real turning point for the way people saw him, and kind of reminded people what he was really like. Let me see here. Let me see. That leftist agitation. Yeah, the Palestine question is a valid question. Confederates lost because of their personal beliefs. I do have relics. I have John Brown's journal, which I acquired from the National Smithsonian. I would love to read it. I don't know that you did that, but okay. Christianity started the Crusades, which were wars of reconquering lands such as Spain and the Middle East. Is Islam incompatible with Western society? No. Radical Islam is, though. But it's good to see you, Gaihan. History may push left, economics pushes right. What? Are you an atheist? No. But I tolerate skeptics on the channel. You need to be skeptical. Life is full of skepticism. Every right-wing president has pushed the national debt higher. Well, thank you, Mathan, for telling us how you voted in the last election. Yes, they have. At this point, nobody cares about the national debt. I'm not even arguing politics. I'm just saying that historically, look at Andrew Jackson for the model of how to get rid of the national debt, and Bill Clinton, the saving grace for the Democrats on that end. Let me see. Man, I gave you a chance to listen to your history lessons, but you were just talking out of your behind when you said Islam dehumanizes women. It does. And I didn't say Islam. I said radical Islam. Sharia law. Yes, it's dehumanizing to be forced to wear something and not be able to take it off. It is dehumanizing not to be able to go to school. It is dehumanizing to have no ability to hold political power. Do you want me to go on? What wars did Trump end? Well, he started it, but Iran, Israel, brought a ceasefire to Gaza and brought the hostages home, something no one thought would happen. Cambodian, Thailand, India, Pakistan, he was involved with that. How much he was involved, it's really not an issue. See, this is the thing. People can't give him credit for anything. And I give him credit for something, and that makes me a right-winger. I really hate that. As a historian, do you think women's liberation caused a domino effect directing today's men's loneliness and the decline of birth rates because of the availability of more options to choose higher value men? Sure, why not? Look up the article of the Smithsonian giving the journal back to the families. That was me. Oh, really? That'd be cool. Let me see. I canceled my date with Piers Morgan's wife to be here. How dare you say that to me? Israel and Palestine are still at war. Cambodia and Thailand are still at war. No, Cambodia and Thailand actually agreed to a ceasefire, and they agreed to a new ceasefire today. In Israel and Palestine, you have a ceasefire. That is not the same thing as the end of hostilities. The hostilities resumed at certain points, and you also have the releasing of the hostages, which was something that was a huge step towards the end of the war. There's a peace plan that is in talks. So I'm saying that there was progress made in international relations that part of that is Trump's doing. Anyways, so my sister was crying because she was afraid to go outside because under Islamic law she could get arrested for being women. I wonder why I'm Islamophobic. I get it, I do, but I don't think that's the solution. In France and Belgium, they force women to take off their headscarves. In France, women aren't allowed to wear dresses anymore. Isn't that a good thing? because those are not Muslim countries. So the West dehumanizes women. No, they don't allow women to be dehumanized. That's like saying slave masters gave food to their slaves, so when the West forced the Arabs to stop enslaving them, or the Ottomans to stop enslaving them, that was dehumanizing, to get rid of their slaves, or get rid of their food. Yeah. Would you rate Hannibal above Andrew Jackson for the best military leadership? Yes. The tension has been going on for 900 years and there is no peace in sight. A lot to do with the territory. That's true. There was a conflict, it broke out, it stopped, it restarted, it stopped again. That's what's happened. So, you can guess where I'm from. I'm not going to say where. These problems will continue long after you're gone. They all predate you and will continue. The whole thing is rigged. You must make corruption work for you. Sure, why not? And I finally caught up to the chat. And you know what? I've been going 55 minutes on this and only 45 minutes for that live stream lecture. I feel like I've done a disservice to James Monroe. Let me see. Oh, Harry joined us right at the end. Look at that, Hars. Harry joined us when we went an hour and 40 minutes. Harry joins us at the very end for what was a very enjoyable live stream lecture, but I really enjoyed doing about James Monroe. So please like and subscribe on your way out. Member-only live stream tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern. If you want me to go even more in depth, because there'll be less of us, I would be happy to do that. Join us for that members-only live. Something I'm probably going to start doing once a month. Excuse me. At the very least, it's an extra hour to talk to me. I don't know how much more detail I'll go into. I don't know how much I'll reveal about myself. Personally, I like to keep my anonymity. So yeah. The standard is don't force women to do anything against their will. If it's not okay if a woman is forced to wear a headscarf, it's okay if a woman is forced to take it off. Huh? Okay. That's fascinating. I love how you do not understand how that works, but okay. Yeah. Yeah, Spam Fan. I figured out you were not an American for the record. It's pretty obvious. You got a brand new rope. No, I've got to brand the rope. I don't have merchandise, but I will get it eventually. It's a good thing if France has laws that force women to take off their headscarf. I didn't say it was a good thing. I said that is different than forcing them to wear it. You don't actually listen to what I say. And yes, Steve is correct. Anyways, we're signing off. I don't know where it's not okay to force a woman to put the headscarf on, which is what Muslim countries do. So that dehumanizes women, so you agree that they dehumanize women. So your whataboutism question about France and Belgium is out of the way, and you agree with my original point that radical Islamic countries and Sharia law dehumanizes women. Thank you for coming full circle. Anyways, we're done. I'm wrapping up. Sorry, I keep getting distracted because we've got good questions. I hope everybody takes care, has a great rest of their evening. I am listening to what you're saying. And what you're saying is balderdash, so it's hard to listen to. And I'm not listening to anything, I'm reading it. But yes, Adam, I understand exactly what you are saying. You are saying that radical Islam does not dehumanize women, and I'm saying it does, and you're saying, it's dehumanizing for them not to not allow them to wear that. Well, maybe, but that's not my point. So, thank you. That's how logic works. Anyways, all right. Take care. Thanks everybody for joining us. Like and subscribe on your way out. Thank you for joining us from all over the world. We've had people from India. We've had people from Persia. We've had people everywhere. It's always good to have everyone join us. And I hope you guys take care and join us for that members only live if you want to become a member for bonus content and early access and stuff like that. We've got plenty of other content that you can check out here on the video or on the channel, videos, long form and short form. Take care. Have a great night, and I hope you all do what you should do. And you're like a less annoying Ben Shapiro. Yes, I'm clearly a right-wing commentator who works for the Daily Wire and is Jewish. No, I'm none of those things. I take that as a big insult. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye. See you later.